G'day everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to go through 5 really helpful exercises to help fix a winged scapula. It's something that we see a lot clinically, and I know if you were to turn around and look at yourself from behind in the mirror, it's really common to see people with a scapula that sort of looks like it comes off the back of the rib cage, the upper back, and we can link that to a lot of dysfunction and shoulder pain, poor performance, all the things that I guess we value in terms of what goes on with the shoulder. And scapular winging can be an integral part of that dysfunction. So it's really important to have some really clear ideas and some exercises to do to try and get back on top of that scapular winging. So we're going to talk about 5 exercises that in isolation should hopefully help to some degree. But the real benefit is if you add all of these up together, because there's a couple here that will hopefully get to sort of the root cause of scapular winging. And there's a few others that sort of undo some of the symptoms associated with it. So if you just sort of do 1 or 2 of these and don't do all of them together, then it might be hard to get on top of this because you might be missing a crucial piece of that puzzle. And then as always, towards the end of the video, we'll talk about why scapular winging occurs. And like a lot of things that are sort of common knowledge in the industry and in the wider public, there seems to be some common misconceptions surrounding things. And in particular, what causes scapular winging, and sort of what you need to do to solve it, to get rid of it, to be someone who used to have a winged scapula. So we'll get to that towards the end of the video. So if you'd like to hang around for that, hopefully have a really well-rounded understanding of what it is and how to get rid of it by the time we're finished here. So I think the first thing that we want to get to is some exercises to try and undo that scapular winging. So the first one that I want to get to is going to be probably the most important one to begin with. Because from what I see clinically, this part of the whole issue itself often gets missed because it doesn't stand out, it doesn't hurt generally, but it's often quite stiff and tight. And mechanically, this is potentially one of the main reasons why scapula tends to wing. So if we don't address this specifically in particular, then it can be quite hard to solve this problem. So the first thing that we want to talk about is we want to talk about a lot of the stiffness and the tightness at the back of the shoulder. Now, the reason why this is so important is, I guess one of the misconceptions, to talk about off the top is that scapular winging is a weakness issue, or that it happens because there's muscles in your upper back that are weak, and that weakness causes that scapula to lift off the upper back, off that thoracic area. So, but clinically, it tends to be more of a stiffness, tightness mechanism that creates it. And just doing strength exercises alone, which we will get to, we'll throw a strength exercise into the 5 that we're going to go through. But I really want to make a big song and dance about this part of the mechanism because it's often missed and is often one of the main reasons that I see that scapular winging persists and it doesn't go away. And basically what happens here, as we start to get a little bit tight through the back of the shoulder, and we'll talk about why this happens at the end of the video, but tightness at the back of the shoulder here, particularly in a lot of muscles that attach from the arm to the scapula itself, if you can see this. But if you can imagine that the best position for your shoulder blade is back and having it flat against your upper back, which is the whole point of the video, if it starts to wing a little bit and starts to lift off a little bit, it's often because this tightness is pulling that shoulder blade closer to the arm itself. So in actual fact, if we can get at this tightness and improve the amount of mobility and feed some slack into that area, we can sort of dissociate the shoulder from the shoulder blade, allowing you to position it better. So a lot of what I see clinically is that the winging of the scapula is just the body becoming tight at the back and sort of drawing those 2 structures together, which forces it to come off the rib cage, the upper back. So trying to feed some slack by opening that up and sort of almost pulling those 2 structures apart can really help the overall underlying issues that are creating this issue. So a really simple way to do that is with a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball, as we have here. You just want to use something that you feel gets into these areas of tightness. So traditionally, I would get everyone to lie down and do this because it's much easier to do. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to do it up against the wall here. But it's a very simple exercise. All we're trying to do is place the ball at the back of the shoulder, pretty much just above the armpit. We're going to get you to lean back onto something or lie on the ground to find it. So what I would suggest for a lot of people is you don't want to be on the shoulder blade. You don't necessarily want to be on the shoulder itself. You want to be on that imaginary line going up from your armpit. Essentially, you want to follow the tightness. And it's not going to be too hard for you to find this if you have a winged scapula, because it's probably going to be tight, or it should be tight, I'd expect. But when you have your arm by your side, you may find that there's a little bit of tenderness, a little bit of tightness. All I want you to do here is just let the ball press in to begin with. Just let it sink in, try and sort of work through that tight restricted tissue. What you can do if it feels comfortable is you can tense the muscles, tense your shoulder muscles, hold them for a few seconds and then relax. And then you might find that helps you sink a little bit lower. The other thing that we can do here is once you feel like you've found some of that low hanging fruit at the back, we can get you to have your arm out to the side, or we can get you to hug yourself to really open up the back of that shoulder. So you're going to have to change the angle. So instead of lying sort of straight back onto it, you're most likely going to have to turn around to the side a little bit just to get that pressure that you want. But by pulling your elbow around and opening up the back of that arm, what you'll find is you'll expose a lot more of that muscular tightness, that soft tissue restriction that you were before. And we can do the same thing again. You can grind away if you want to, but again, you can just stay here and let the ball press in. And one of the things we can do to improve this further is if you can compress the ball up against the wall or the floor, and then just try and keep the ball there and shear your arm across the front. What you're actually doing here is tacking down that tightness and then using movement to shear that tightness past the ball. And then what you'd find almost instantaneously is in terms of how mobile that shoulder is. So for me on this right hand side, for me, if I keep my shoulders back and reach across, I can sort of get just to 90 degrees here before it feels like I need to bring my shoulder blade around with it. But on this side, just after having done that, what you can hopefully see is that I've got a lot more room to move. So for me, keeping my shoulders back, I can get to here now, and then before my shoulder blade comes around. So we want to feed as much slack into the back aspect of that shoulder as possible in order to take that handbrake off and allow that scapula to sort of settle back down onto the upper back. So it's a really important piece of the puzzle. Second piece of the puzzle involves getting to the stiffness and the tightness of the rib cage underneath and inside of that shoulder blade. So it's the same idea again, but instead of being on the outside of the shoulder here, we're going to go on the inside of the shoulder blade. So wherever the scapula ends, in between that and the spine itself, we want to have the ball in that area. Same deal again, we want to lie down or lean up against the wall, move the ball around until you feel like you hit something that feels stiff. And then once you've done that, what I want to get you to do here is incorporate some arm movement. So we can use movement through the arm in the same way that we did at the end with the going across the body. We can do the same thing through here to shear free some of the stiffness and the tightness of that rib cage, stiffness and tightness through the soft tissue of that thoracic spine. Again, all of this becomes tight and stiff if your scapula is winging, but more importantly, the stiffness and tightness through here can create that winging scapula in terms of mechanical dysfunction. So by freeing up a lot of the stiffness and tightness here, it'll tie into the next exercise, and you'll see why this is important. But we want to make sure that we're getting at the back of the shoulder and the upper back, freeing that up, so that when we move that arm, all of a sudden we have extra range of motion and we can sort of dissociate that shoulder blade from the arm itself, dissociate the shoulder blade from the upper back as well. So two really important areas to consider, probably the most important based on what I see. The third one tends to be more of the traditional focus, the things that you probably get exercises focused on as if you speak to most people, and that's sort of freeing up the chest. So we see, or the common thinking is, the chest becomes tight, it sort of pulls the shoulder forwards, and then the scapula at the back can sort of lift off from that position. Now, while I certainly agree that chest tightness can be really important, the reason, as I said before, that it links into the stiffness at the back, and we've done a video on this before, is that a lot of chest wall tightness is based on stiffness coming from the upper back, because generally the upper back becomes stiff, the ribs become stiff, and as those ribs travel around to the front, any of the soft tissue that attaches to those ribs, which is the pecs and the chest muscles, can become tight reactively. So if we're just doing the standard chest stretches trying to free up this chest, but we're not addressing the upper back stiffness, we're going to have to keep stretching this chest tightness because it's going to keep being asked to come back. So again, if we're trying to free this up, so any chest stretch will do. So if you put your arm up against a wall, pulling yourself around, trying to find some tightness through here. Again, you shouldn't be jamming up the shoulder. You should feel some tightness somewhere in the chest. Again, what we want to do here is we want to tense that muscle up, so you can either push back into the wall or try and pull your arm around or make these muscles work for a couple of seconds. As they work, they contract so that when you relax, it releases and feels looser. It should allow you to go further into that stretch. Now again, just to reiterate this, these muscles are generally only tight because of the stiffness in the upper back that's asking for extra support, extra help reinforcing that area. So if you're freeing this up, you have to spend time on the ball or a tennis ball, whatever it is, freeing up the tissue in your upper back so that this doesn't have to come back again. So those three areas are intrinsically linked in terms of being tight and forcing the shoulder into a position it shouldn't be and asking that scapula to wing. Now, I guess the thing to note with this is, from what I see clinically, a lot of scapular winging is based on stiffness and tightness, sort of forcing that scapula into a bad position. One of the common misconceptions is that is it weakness related. Now, there's absolutely conditions and neural issues that sort of create abnormal weakness and dysfunction that sort of lend itself to a scapular winging. This isn't necessarily commenting about that specifically, even though these exercises may help that to some degree, but you'd have to figure that out for yourself. But this is more so for just your general scapular winging, where people are just walking around, they don't know they've got it, or they've been told that they have it and they're trying to fix it. So probably 99% of the population this video is for. Those more rare cases where there is some actual neural dysfunction that's creating that, it's a whole different ball game that we sort of need to sort of look at you individually and figure that stuff out. But again, this is broader stuff. So the next thing on that topic of weakness / strength is we do want to go through a sort of a basic strength exercise. Now, traditionally with scapular winging, there's a whole bunch of things that are tight and that scapula is lifting off. Again, there's some specific things you can do, but you'd have to sort of speak to someone one-on-one to figure that out. The broader things that are really important, we're trying to get that shoulder to come back and flatten itself up against the thoracic spine. One of the ways that we can do that is with some rowing exercises. So again, there's nothing fancy involved here. All we're doing is, I've got a power band here. It's a band that you can just wrap around something, it's fine. You can use TheraBand, you can use TheraTubing, you can use weights, you can vary this however you want to. The idea is the technical aspect of this. So you can do this leaning over with a weight, you can do this sitting with a band, standing with a band, doesn't matter how you do it. I want to practice this technique under load to get it stronger. And all it is just your basic rowing exercise. So we're pulling the band back towards you and we're sort of sweeping that shoulder blade back and around without trying to move your trunk at all. So it's not a rotational exercise, we're not trying to twist. We're anchoring you here, shoulders in a good position, up nice and tall, and we're pulling that elbow back as the shoulder blade is coming back up against, is sort of scooping around, sort of meeting in the middle. So if you had two hands together, you'd obviously be trying to get those shoulder blades to meet in the middle. We're trying to strengthen the muscles in the upper back that help support and stabilize that scapula. So again, if you're doing that bent over with a weight, we don't want to make sure that you're rotating like you're starting a lawnmower. We want to isolate everything, keep it nice and still, and we're just bending that elbow. Again, we're not letting the elbows flare out. We want to keep the elbows in and pulling those shoulder blades back together. So it's a really good way to fatigue it. So you need to do enough to feel fatigue, which can be 10, 15, 20, 30. We're not necessarily looking at this in terms of like a pure strength exercise. We want to really incorporate a lot of endurance because obviously posture requires endurance. We want those muscles to be able to hold you in a good position long term. We don't just want you to develop that power, which can still be important, but for the purposes of this, sort of higher reps with a lower weight, but still experiencing fatigue with good technique is generally what we'd be looking for. So that's exercise number 4. So the first one is going after the tightness at the back of the shoulder. Second one is going through the stiffness and the tightness in the upper back, which feeds into the third one, which is freeing up the shoulder blade, freeing up the pec muscle so the shoulder blade can get back there easier. The fourth one is adding some strength to the muscles that keep that in a good position as well, sort of complements everything. Now the fifth thing, and if you've been following these videos, you may know what we're about to talk about. I usually preface it with the same conversation saying it is it's not a very interesting topic of conversation. It's not a fun exercise. It's not sexy. It's not interesting. And that's just postural awareness. So if you can call this an exercise, which I would challenge anyone to do this, so I would call it an exercise to practice it. We need to foster really high level amounts of awareness, but also the drive to make a difference. And those two things are crucial to nailing good posture and re-establishing good posture or redeveloping good posture long term. because it's not a one and done experience. You don't click your fingers and then have good posture. It's a piece. It's almost like a piece of artwork that never gets finished. You're just constantly adding to it, constantly changing things, constantly being aware of it. So you can't conquer posture, because the moment that you feel like you've got good posture, you might find that you just don't pick up on all the times that you're getting back out of that again. And it's a really, really important conversation to have, because it ties into what causes scapular winging, which is what we want to get to in a few seconds. We want to tie all this together, because what we find here, and like everything that we talk about, if we're saying that your chest is tight, your upper back's tight, the back of your shoulder is tight, we need to give you explanations for why they become tight in the first place, and why one side might be tighter than the other, which causes one scapula to wing more than the other. It's really important, because if we're not sort of connecting the dots between why these things happen and your postural habits, then we're not going to fix it. We can make strong inroads, but it may come back again, or you may not see the improvements that you want, particularly if you already have shoulder pain, neck pain, back pain, or whatever reason why we're having this conversation about scapular winging in the first place. So what we see, again, we talk about this a lot, the common sort of posture that people get into when they're not thinking about it, or when they're doing something more important, thanks to gravity, it's normally a dropping down and rolling forwards. And we see the upper back rounds, sometimes the chin pokes out, but essentially the position that we're in is the shoulders are dropping and rolling thanks to gravity. So the weight of the arm in front of us, maybe if our arms are behind us, we drop down and back a little bit more, but we're always in this position, whether it's on the mouse, the keyboards, whether on our phones, whether we're driving the car, whatever it is, leaning down. This position basically, where the weight of the arm acting against gravity is just constantly creating tension through all of these areas. And what we know about the body is it just adapts to what you ask of it. So if you're in this position a lot and you don't realize it, you've always got tension through this area. So the back of the shoulder then becomes tight to support the weight of the arm. We always have tension in the upper back and neck, because the whole shoulder girdle is just hanging off that part of your body. And again, we know if this gets tight, it asks the front to get tight as well. So all of these mechanisms, this creation of tightness generally just comes from the positions that we put it in long term. So if we're not picking up on that and trying to get into a better position, where we're bringing those shoulders back and slightly up again to sort of counteract that down and forwards, then we're not going to make that significant long-term change. Now, to tie this into strength work, the main reason why I see that these muscles in your upper back get weak in the first place is that we're just not using them. So when you're in this position, the reason why this feels comfortable for a lot of people and why it's a default for a lot of people is that we're not actively engaging muscles to hold us in a good position. The reason why we don't like holding good posture for too long is that when we pull your shoulders back into a better position, you actively have to hold yourself here to a degree. So we're not in this position where it's over the top, but just a low amount of tension requires endurance and application and awareness to sustain over time and to sustain long term. So if we're constantly defaulting into these rounded, poor shoulder shapes, those scapular muscles that are supposed to hold it back into a good position are being replaced by tightness and stiffness, because that's the pathway that we've chosen without realizing it. So I guess to summarize basically what this is, from what I see clinically, scapular winging, when it's not associated with some neurological issues or some trauma, sort of obviously that sort of 1% that we see, generally it's just a consequence of the shapes, the positions and the postures that you get those tissues into without realizing it, because it doesn't stand out, it doesn't cause you grief until at some point down the track it causes you grief. And we know that if you are going after these stiffnesses and tightnesses and not necessarily improving the position that your shoulder's in, obviously that winging will hang around, but all the tightnesses and the stiffnesses that you're trying to undo with the ball or with stretching aren't going to get anywhere. You're not going to make any ground, because the 5 minutes you might spend freeing up your chest, and then if you then sit at the computer for 7 hours back in the same position, you're not going to sort of counterbalance that enough to make change. You're going to be potentially just going up and down on the spot, or potentially getting worse over time, depending on how that balances out for you. So hopefully that's a really useful set of skills, useful set of tools and stretches to help you undo that scapular winging. It's not a permanent thing for a lot of people. It's only permanent if the environment stays the same. If your posture stays the same, if you're not going after the stiffnesses and tightnesses that are there, then it's realistic to expect, or it's not unrealistic to see that those tissues don't change, that scapula doesn't reposition itself But again, if you're working towards restoring normal function to the tissues, normal positioning to the tissues, it's absolutely reasonable to expect that that scapular winging will change. So let me know in the comments below, like what's going on with your shoulder? What's brought you to this video? Is it because you've got shoulder pain? Is it just something that you're, an associate or a parent or a family member or your physical therapist or your doctor has mentioned to you, and you're looking for some more information about that? I'd be really interested to know what context we're talking about your scapular winging. And as always, if you found these tips useful, please leave a like rating down below and consider subscribing to the channel. It obviously helps support the channel. We really want it to grow so that these videos can reach more people. So we'd really appreciate the support if you could do that for us. So again, just let me know down below if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. But until next time, we'll see you soon, and we'll talk soon. Bye.